Medicine Bluff was the 19th century version of a wellness retreat, with one hell of a twist. The Comanche believed a leap from its summit could make you young again. The catch? If the Great Spirit wasn't in a good mood, you just became a well-marinated meal for the wolves below. This wasn't a legend about faith, it was a story about the world's most extreme all-or-nothing gamble. Deep in the Wichita Mountains of Indian Territory, this was no ordinary hill. It was a colossal, 310-foot butte that looked like it had been dropped there by a bored god, a feature so out of place that geologists chalked it up to an extraordinary seismic convulsion that tore it from its normal position. It stood like a silent, stone sentinel, casting a long shadow over the land and the people who revered it. This was a place where the rules of the known world felt suspended, a clinic for the desperate operated by a deity with a flair for the dramatic. At its base, a creek 70 feet wide carved a crescent moon shape into the earth, forming a deep, unnerving pool. When the bluff's shadow fell across it, the water turned a profound, bottomless black, like a pool of pure ink. But when the sun hit it directly, the surface would glitter so intensely it was painful to look at, a dazzling, blinding current that seemed to flow with energy. The Comanche called the creek Medicine Bluff Creek, and the monolith above it, simply, Medicine Bluff. For generations beyond memory, it was their most sacred cathedral and their most feared hospital. It was a place of last resort, the Lourdes of the Great Plains, where the sick and dying were brought after the tribe's most famous medicine men had given up, shaken their heads, and walked away. The terms and conditions for healing were brutally straightforward. If a patient had lived a life that never offended the Great Spirit, their cure would be, as the stories claim, sudden and miraculous. They would walk down from the summit whole again. However, if the patient had, at any point, displeased the divine, the consequences were immediate and non-negotiable. They would die on the spot. Their body would be left for the wolves, and their bones would be dragged off to a place the Comanche only referred to as the horrible land. There was a third option, a sort of celestial consolation prize. If a person of exemplary character was not healed of their physical ailment, they were simply transfigured, whisked away to the happy hunting grounds in a direct, spiritual ascension, much like the prophet Elisha from another culture's holy book. This wasn't just superstition. The Comanche claimed to have evidence. They swore that on certain nights, the Great Spirit itself would descend and rest upon the highest point of the bluff. When this happened, the entire landscape to the horizon would be bathed in an eerie, otherworldly light, a phenomenon they likened to the glow of a prairie fire reflecting off the clouds. More strangely, they insisted that no dew or rain ever fell on the sacred summit where the sick would lie, waiting for their verdict. It was a pocket of unnatural calm. No wind ever blew there, making it a haven of quiet, a pocket dimension containing all the elements necessary for a swift recovery or a swift departure. It was a place teetering on the edge of reality, where anything, even cheating death, seemed entirely possible. But rules are just theory. What happens when someone actually tests the warranty? The most enduring legend of Medicine Bluff was told in 1868. After a fragile peace had settled over the plains, the storyteller was a Comanche warrior so old and wrinkled, his skin looked like smoked parchment. He claimed to have lived nearly 80 years, and he spoke of a time long before the white man had come to change the world. In this bygone era, there was a warrior who had become ancient himself, a man so decrepit and despairing that his days of hunting buffalo were a distant memory. He lived among the women, a relic of a former time, waiting for death to finally claim him. One day, tired of waiting, he decided to take matters into his own hands. He struggled up the steep path to the top of Medicine Bluff, not with any hope of being healed, but with the fervent wish that he would finally die and be granted passage to the happy hunting grounds. For 3 nights, his lodge was empty. The people of his village watched the summit of the bluff, and for that entire time, they saw a great fire burning on the peak. It was like a signal fire, but it wasn't warning of an enemy attack. It was something else, something divine and unsettling. Then, on the morning of the 3rd day, the fire was gone. In its place, a figure was seen descending the treacherous path. It wasn't the old, stooped man who had climbed it. This was a young warrior, strong and confident, moving with a purpose that commanded attention. He walked into the village and looked around with an expression of marked surprise, as if seeing it all for the first time, before making his way to the chief's lodge and taking a seat by the fire. The other warriors gathered, looking at the stranger with a mixture of awe and suspicion. No one recognized him. Yet, he carried a pipe decorated with the feathers of the great war eagle, a clear sign that he was, or had been, a mighty warrior who had taken many scalps. After the pipe was passed in solemn silence, the stranger began to speak, and the mystery deepened. He said that he was the old man who had vanished. He told them that after reaching the peak, he looked down and saw his village below, heard the distant barking of dogs and the laughter of children. He could even hear his own family weeping, already mourning him as if he were lost forever. He saw the great herds of buffalo covering the plains and the cunning wolves waiting for their chance. In that moment he had asked himself, "Why am I still alive? My fire has gone out. I must follow my fathers." He looked at the beauty of the world, a world that belonged to the young, and felt it held no more joy for the old. With that thought, he gathered his remaining strength and threw himself from the giddy height, expecting nothing but the end. Instead of oblivion, he was lifted up in midair and instantly transported to another land. It was a paradise with endless game, a place with no wind, no rain, and no sickness. All the great Comanche chiefs were there, and they were all young again, feasting and hunting as they had in their prime. There was no darkness, only happiness. The rejuvenated old chief had been sent back, returned to his people with all the vigor of his lost youth. The story was so powerful, so mesmerizing, that he instantly became a great prophet and medicine man. His cures were said to be miraculous, and his advice, from that day on, was followed as law. If a place holds the power to grant a man a new life, it stands to reason it could also make him invincible in a fight. For the Comanche, this wasn't a question. It was a core component of their military strategy. Medicine Bluff wasn't just a place for the sick and the dying. It was a sacred forge for the young and ambitious. It was the designated meeting point for warriors about to join their first war party, a place to perform a great medicine ceremony to their god, the sun. This was no simple prayer. It was a grueling 3-day ritual that was part boot camp and part divine transaction. For 3 consecutive mornings, the aspiring warrior had to climb to the highest point of the Great Butte, alone, carrying only his buffalo hide shield. There, as the first rays of dawn spilled over the horizon, painting the jagged cliffs in gold, he had to present his shield to the rising sun with the utmost reverence. This wasn't a passive offering. The young man was required to hold the posture of a warrior in the thick of combat, constantly moving, bracing against invisible blows, and fending off the ghosts of spears and arrows. It was a physical and spiritual endurance test. If the ceremony was performed correctly, with the proper devotion, the sun god would bestow a supernatural gift upon him. His shield would be rendered invulnerable, capable of turning away any projectile. It was a belief system that treated divine power as a tangible upgrade, turning a piece of animal hide into divinely enforced body armor. But gods and their magic require belief to survive, and belief is a fragile thing, easily eroded by the harsh realities of a changing world. Over time, Medicine Bluff naturally lost much of its prestige. The reasons were tragically practical. The great herds of buffalo, the lifeblood of the plains tribes, were systematically hunted to near extinction. The tribes themselves were scattered, their power broken, and they were increasingly confined to the strict boundaries of reservations. A new generation of Comanche children was being sent to schools, where they were taught a different worldview. The old ways, the superstitions that had defined their parents' lives, began to fade from memory, becoming strange stories known only to the few remaining old warriors who remembered a different time. As the magic for healing and warfare drained from the bluff, its purpose shifted to a final, grim utility. When a culture's hope begins to die, its sacred places often become monuments to despair. Like people of any society facing crushing disappointment and suffering, the Comanche sometimes sought an end to their burdens through suicide. And for the once mighty Comanches, Medicine Bluff became one of the most famous locations to do it. It served the same function as the Vendôme Column in Paris for the French. It was a well-known landmark used to end an unsatisfactory and miserable existence. The place that once offered rebirth and invincibility became, in the end, just a high place to fall from. Every culture has stories that serve as warnings, tales of pride and ego that end in ruin. This one comes from a source as old as the mountains themselves. The story was told in the winter of 1868 by an Osage man named Little Beaver, a person so ancient the narrator telling the tale claimed he was the oldest red man he had ever seen. Little Beaver, with a face like a dried riverbed, said he was the brother to the oldest peaks of the Wichita Mountains, and he spoke of a time when the Comanches were, without question, the greatest tribe on earth. Their warriors were as numerous as the buffalo, their cunning sharper than a coyote's, and their wealth in horses was beyond counting. They were the undisputed masters of their domain. Within this nation of legendary warriors, two men stood above all others. One was young and burning with ambition, the other was middle-aged and hardened by years of victory. They were the tribe's top assets, but they were also locked in a bitter and relentless rivalry. They were intensely jealous of one another, each man constantly trying to perform some act of impossible bravery that his rival would not, or could not, dare to imitate. It was a toxic, high-stakes game of one-upmanship that could only end when one of them was broken. That breaking point came on a late autumn afternoon, as the tribe camped in the shadow of Medicine Bluff after one of their most celebrated victories. The mood was triumphant. The young warrior sat by a fire, roasting antelope meat and smoking his pipe, when his eyes fell upon the highest point of the cliff. He stared for several minutes, lost in a deep and dangerous thought. Suddenly, he leaped to his feet. He looked out over the other warriors scattered across the grass, his face a mask of pure defiance. Turning toward the setting sun, he made a public declaration, a boast aimed like a poison arrow directly at the heart of his rival. "No warrior is my equal," he announced. "I am the greatest of all the Comanches. I am like that mountain." He punctuated the claim by pointing his lance at the sacred summit of Medicine Bluff. Then he twisted the knife. "My deeds are as high above yours as that mountain is above the creek at its feet. Is there a warrior here who dares follow me?" He shook his lance and shield, a final, unmistakable challenge. Throughout this performance, his rival had been sitting nearby, swelling with anger and pride. He knew every word was meant for him. He rose with the slow, deliberate grace of a predator and walked toward the boaster. Stopping before him, he struck his own chest repeatedly with a closed fist. "So," he began, his voice low and dripping with contempt, "you are the greatest warrior of the Comanches? You are the bull that leads the herd?" He paused, letting the insult hang in the air. "And I? Am I the old bull, driven off by cowardly wolves to die, so my bones can whiten on the prairie? You tell me to follow you? Never." He stared directly into the young man's eyes. "I never follow. I will go with you." The challenge was accepted, but the terms had been chillingly redefined. This was not about leadership, it was about a shared, final destination. The entire tribe gathered, a silent audience to a duel of ultimate pride. The two rivals went to their lodges and returned dressed in their finest deerskin and moccasins, mounting their favorite war ponies. With their painted shields raised and the eagle feathers of their war bonnets catching the wind, they rode off without another word. They crossed the glittering creek and began the ascent up the difficult trail leading to the sacred peak. At the very top, with the ground falling away into a frightful abyss just feet away, the young warrior reined in his nervous horse. He looked at his opponent and issued the final, fatal challenge. "You have followed me so far? Follow me farther." With a sharp war whoop that echoed across the valley, the young man spurred his horse, charging directly toward the horrible brink. Almost instantly, his rival reared his own horse, let out an even more ear-piercing yell, and followed. But for the young boaster, the sight of the empty air just beyond his horse's head was too much. At the last possible second, his nerve broke. He lacked courage, violently pulling his horse back from the edge so hard it reared up on its hind legs. In that single moment of hesitation, the older warrior saw his victory. With a terrible yell of defiance and triumph, he didn't slow down. He forced his horse into the fearful leap into midair. The warriors watching from below saw it all. They saw him make the jump, sitting calmly in his saddle, as straight and dignified as if his animal was galloping on the prairie. And above the wind they all heard his triumphant final words echo from the clouds. "The greatest of all the Comanches." The warriors who witnessed the leap descended from their vantage point and made their way to the base of the great cliff. There, on the rocks below, they found exactly what they expected. The brave warrior and his horse lay in a single, mangled heap. The price of the jump had been total physical destruction. Yet, as they looked closer, they saw that the dead man's face was not twisted in agony. Instead, it held a serene, unmistakable smile of pure triumph. He had proven his point in the most absolute way possible, and in doing so had won the duel and secured his name in legend forever. his death was his victory. His rival, the young boaster whose nerve had failed him at the critical moment, faced a far crueler fate. He didn't die, but his life was effectively over. He became a wanderer and an outcast, drifting between tribes as a living specter of shame. His name became a curse, a story told to children about the poison of pride and the stain of cowardice. He was so reviled that even the camp dogs would reportedly snarl and growl at him as he passed. He had avoided the fall, but he could not escape the judgment of his people. This torment of public disgrace and private remorse ate away at him until there was nothing left. Eventually, unable to live with the consequences of his cowardice, he returned to the one place that defined his failure, Medicine Bluff. There, at the foot of the cliff, directly on the grave of the man he had challenged, he took his own life. But even in death, he found no dignity. His body lay undiscovered long enough for the coyotes to find him. When he was finally found, there was little left. Only his shield and lance, the useless symbols of a warrior's honor, remained on the ground to identify the man who had lost everything. One warrior leaped to become a god, the other leaped to settle a grudge. At Medicine Bluff, the price of Comanche valor was always paid in full, usually with a 300-foot drop. History rarely cares if a story is a legend or a lie, only what's left at the bottom. History isn't pretty. We don't do pretty. Subscribe for another dose of the ugly truth.